Today we are comparing the USA to Europe. The US has 50 states and Europe has 44 countries, so you could almost say that a single state can be compared to a European country. And for many reasons, this seems to be the case. Despite the USA being one country, every state has its own laws and can be very different from other states, just like the neighboring countries in Europe. Starting with basic geography, Europe has a land area of 10.53 million kilometers squared, and the USA has a land area of 9.83 million kilometers squared. This is quite similar, however, a substantial part of Russia counts as Europe as well, but there are relatively few people living there, but I guess the USA has a lot of remote areas too. 742 million inhabitants are living in Europe compared to only 333 million in the US, making Europe more than twice as densely populated. But the US has a growth population rate of 0.53%, meaning that last year the population grew by almost 2 million people. But Europe saw a slight decline in their population numbers with a 0.08% decline. Life expectancy is higher in Europe. On average, inhabitants reach the age of 80.1 years, whereas the Americans have an average 76.3 year long life. Taking a look at the economy, the US beats Europe with a GDP of just over $29 trillion, which is equal to the GDP per capita of $85,000, whereas the European countries combined have a GDP of just over $24 trillion, meaning a GDP of just $34,500 per capita. So, the much larger European population has a much lower GDP per capita. And what's interesting is that some states and countries carry the other ones here. The darker colored states on this map have the highest GDP in the country, and the lighter ones are lower. And the same goes for the European countries, where the Western European countries are much wealthier than the Eastern ones, which is clearly visible on this map. So it's true, together they stand stronger. A large part of all that American money is spent on the military, where it outranks Europe and every other country in the world in expenditure, and most numbers of forces and equipment too. In 2023, the US spent $916 billion on their military, more than triple of what is spent across Europe. The main benefit in the US is that every state has the same official language, which makes it much easier to communicate and trade, but also in politics this is a huge benefit. In the European countries there are 24 official languages in the European Union alone. Speaking of the European Union, these are the 27 countries that are in the EU after Great Britain left a couple of years ago. They try to work together as you stand stronger together, but many different opinions and cultures often prevent new laws. Up next, let's compare the Human Development Index, which takes multiple factors into account such as healthcare, education and safety. The US has a score of 0.927, which is slightly lower than the Western European countries, but significantly higher than the Eastern European countries. And on average, Europe has a score of 0.896 on the Human Development Index. The US and Europe are at similar latitudes as well, but it may surprise you which cities actually align. Click here to find out.